Hey there! If you're new to the United States, this one's for you. We're going to take a look at the American system of government, but we're going to go a little deeper. We're not just going to talk about how it works, but, and this is the important part, why it was designed this way in the first place. Understanding that why, well, that's the real key to understanding the country itself.
Okay, this right here, this is probably the most important idea you need to wrap your head around. America isn't built on ancient history or some shared ancestry going back thousands of years. It's an ongoing project. It's an experiment built on a set of ideas. And, just like any experiment, it can be tweaked, it can be improved, or it can be broken. You see, to really get America today, you've got to look back at the problems the founders were trying to solve. And here's a little secret, they didn't get it right on the first try. Not even close. The system we have now is actually their second attempt, and it was born from a pretty spectacular failure. So let's start there, with that first attempt. Right after they won independence from a king, the early Americans had one major thing on their minds: how to stop a new king from ever showing up again. I mean, this fear was everything to them. Think about it. They had just fought this long, brutal war against what they saw as a powerful, abusive government that was an entire ocean away. So their very first instinct was to create a system where power was spread out, decentralized, and kept as weak as humanly possible. And what they came up with was something called the Articles of Confederation. It was a system that was, by design, incredibly weak. There was no president, there was no national power to tax anyone, there was no real central government to speak of. Basically, each state was like its own little country, just kind of loosely allied with the others. This, to them, was what maximum freedom looked like. So how did that work out? It was a disaster, a total mess. The brand new nation couldn't pay its own soldiers or its debts to other countries. The states were bickering with each other over trade and printing their own money, which made it worthless. Foreign countries looked at the U.S. and basically saw it as a joke. This wasn't freedom, it was chaos. The whole thing was on the verge of falling apart. And that's when they learned this incredibly powerful lesson, the hard way. Complete freedom from any kind of central structure doesn't actually lead to liberty. It leads to anarchy. And they realized that that kind of instability, well, that's exactly the kind of situation that invites a real tyrant to sweep in and promise to fix everything. Okay, so this massive failure, it forced them right back to the drawing board. They knew, without a doubt, they needed a stronger government. But that deep-seated fear of creating a new king, that was still very, very real. And all of this led them to a brilliant new question. This question, right here, is the very soul of the U.S. Constitution. It's not about getting rid of power, it's about controlling power. How can you possibly give a government enough muscle to actually get things done, but not so much that it can turn around and crush its own people? That was the puzzle they gathered to solve back in 1787. And look, this didn't just happen overnight. You can see there's a gap there, 6 whole years between when they adopted that first failed system and when they finally met to create a new one. Those 6 years were basically a masterclass in what not to do. This was their big aha moment. They studied the history of other republics, trying to figure out where they all went wrong. And they realized the real enemy wasn't power itself. It was power that didn't have to answer to anyone. So the new goal became building an entire system around one single idea: accountability. So how did they actually do it? How did they turn this big idea of accountability into a real system of government? Well, they invented some brand new structures. And they were actually pretty clever, even using the specific meanings of words to build limits and controls right into the system. For example, let's take the word Congress. The name itself comes from Latin, and it literally means to come together. That tells you exactly what it's supposed to be: a place for all these different people with different interests from different places to come together, to argue, to debate, and to hopefully compromise to write laws. It was never meant to be a single body that just rules from on high. And what about the president? That title also comes from Latin, and it means to sit before. Again, think about that. This isn't a king meant to rule over people. It's a presiding officer, an executive whose job is to carry out the laws that Congress passes. They made the office strong enough to actually get things done, but also accountable and, this is the most important part, removable. This chart really lays it all out, doesn't it? You can see the huge shift in thinking. They went from a system of weakness and chaos to one of shared power and structured freedom. They didn't just give all the power to the new central government. Instead, they created a system where power was divided up and forced to work together. And this is how they pulled it off. This is the genius part. They separated power into 3 different branches. The idea was that human nature, well, it's ambitious. So why not build a system that uses ambition against itself? The ambition of Congress to make laws is checked by the president's ambition to carry them out, and both are checked by the court's ambition to interpret them. No single branch could ever become all-powerful.
Now, let's talk for a second about the original idea for the electors, the people who make up the Electoral College. This is really interesting. They weren't supposed to be loyal party members who just rubber stamp a vote. The founders actually designed them to be independent, respected citizens who would use their own judgment as a final firewall, a last defense to protect the country from corruption, foreign meddling, or what they called mob rule.
Okay, so that's the history lesson. That's the theory. But what does any of this mean for you today as a new American? This is where it all gets personal. And here's something absolutely crucial to remember. The people who wrote all this stuff, they knew they weren't perfect. They knew they couldn't see the future. So they built ways to change the system, like the amendment process, right into the Constitution. They didn't want people to blindly obey every word they wrote. They expected future generations to be active partners in fixing the system's flaws as they appeared. So when you become a citizen, you're not just getting a passport, you're inheriting a job, a responsibility. You inherit the duty to try and understand this complicated machine, to use your voice, and to take part in the very hard work of keeping it running. This might be the single most important takeaway. American democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not something you just watch on TV. The entire system was designed with the assumption that its citizens would be informed, engaged, and paying attention. The moment that stops happening, the whole experiment starts to drift.
And that just brings us full circle, right back to where we started. The survival of this entire thing rests on one idea, that the people living in it understand the reasons why it was built this way, the fear of tyranny, the lessons learned from chaos, and the delicate, difficult balance of accountable power.
Because that original question, how do we create power without creating a tyrant? It's never permanently answered. It's not a math problem you solve once and you're done. Every single generation has to answer it all over again for themselves. And now, as a new American, that question and the future of this whole unfinished experiment, it belongs to you too.